Their screams pierced the air at 3 a.m. The tycoon stormed in and found the nanny doing this. The red digits on the bedside clock burned 3 a.m., a silent alarm cutting through the gloom of the master suite. Silence inside the Castello estate wasn't just quiet, it was a physical weight you could almost hold in your hands. For 2 years it felt like a slab of ice sitting squarely on Julian's chest every single night. Sleep was a stranger. He just lay there, eyes tracing the shadows on the high ceiling, bracing for the pain to fade or the inevitable storm to break. And right on cue, the nightmare began. A piercing, synchronized shriek shattered the heavy quiet, cutting right through the soundproofing of the East Wing. This wasn't the fussing of 2-year-olds. It was a raw, primal wail of pure misery, Leo and Teo vocalizing a pain far too big for their small bodies. Once again, Julian Castello, a titan who could shift the real estate market with a stroke of a pen, squeezed his eyes shut and swallowed a growl of pure helplessness. He ripped the gray silk sheets aside and bolted upright. His bare feet sank into the Persian rug, but the chill that shot up his spine had nothing to do with the temperature. "Not again," he rasped, rough palms scraping against the 3-day stubble on his jaw. "Please, not again." 5th night running. 3rd nanny in a single month. The agency swore Valeria was the one. 23 spotless record looked like she couldn't hurt a fly. "She has a gift," the director had chirped, flashing that plastic smile that made Julian's skin crawl. "Garbage. All of it. No one could fix this." Ever since Elena passed, the boys had morphed into tiny warlords of grief-destroying toys and screaming until their voices gave out. Julian rose, leaving his silk robe discarded on the floor. He stalked down the corridor past abstract masterpieces worth a fortune that now loomed like judging ghosts in the dim light. The wailing intensified. His fists tightened. She was done. He didn't care what time it was. He would write a check triple pay and have her out the door before sunrise. He was done with excuses. He needed peace. He needed control. He was tired of his own home feeling like a war zone he was destined to lose. He marched forward mentally, sharpening the axe, preparing the cold, cutting words he would deliver. "Pack your bags, you're useless, get out." Anger was safe. Fury beat sorrow any day of the week. He reached the nursery door. The heavy oak vibrated with the noise. He braced himself for the usual scene. The nanny asleep with earplugs or screaming back or sobbing in a corner. He had seen the whole catalog of failure. His hand gripped the cold brass knob. He took a breath, shoved the door open, ready to rage, and then froze. The room wasn't pitch black. A soft golden glow from the dimmers washed over the nursery. And the noise? It wasn't agony. His mind had played tricks on him in the hall. That wasn't screaming. It was laughter. Julian stood rooted to the spot, brain scrambling to make sense of the tableau before him. It was like stepping into another universe. There, dead center on the plush cream rug, was Valeria. She wasn't in pajamas or a messy robe. She was in full uniform navy dress, crisp white collar sharp, and the weirdest part, she was wearing bright yellow dishwashing gloves. She was dancing. But not just dancing, she had massive headphones on, lost in a silent rhythm Julian couldn't hear. Her movements were electric, goofy, completely over the top. She swung her hips, pulling ridiculous faces, waving those yellow rubber hands like puppets, spinning with a clumsy grace that was purely theatrical. And there were Leo and Teo standing up, gripping the rails of their white cribs. The crying had stopped. Their eyes were wide and shimmering with unshed tears, but their mouths hung open in pure belly-shaking delight. Tiny, chubby palms smacked against the crib bars, keeping perfect rhythm with the nanny's wild, silent choreography. And there it was, Teo's laugh, clear as a bell, ringing through the air. It was a sound Julian hadn't heard in months. Completely oblivious to her boss looming in the doorway, Valeria kept the show going. She ducked low, feigning a clumsy trip over nothing. Recovering, with a dramatic spin, she pointed those bright yellow rubber gloves at the babies, pulling a goofy face that sent the boys into another fit of giggles. Julian felt momentarily unmoored. The scene made zero sense. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. He was a serious man, a titan of industry, the grieving husband of a woman who had been the definition of elegance. Yet, here in the heart of his home, the help was performing a silent slapstick routine wearing dishwashing gear. Outrage should have been his first reaction. He should be appalled by the absurdity, but his gaze drifted to his sons. Their cheeks were flushed with life. The shadowing grip of the night terrors had vanished, swept away by pure, unadulterated joy. For a fleeting moment, the frost around Julian's heart thawed. It triggered a memory of what happiness actually felt like within these walls before the accident. Valeria executed one final, slightly awkward pirouette and opened her eyes to take a bow, only to lock eyes with the imposing silhouette of Julian clad in gray silk pajamas and wearing an unreadable expression. She went statue still. The playful grin vanished, instantly seized by sudden sheer panic. She yanked the headphones down around her neck, and the heavy silence of the room came rushing back, broken only by the boys' fading hiccups of laughter as they turned curious eyes toward their father. "Mr. Costello," she whispered, her voice trembling. She dropped her gloved hands as if they were suddenly on fire. Julian took a single step across the threshold. The spell shattered. Cold, hard reality flooded back in. His footsteps on the polished wood sounded like gavel strikes. He approached slowly, his shadow casting a long darkness over the cribs. Sensing the sudden shift in the room's energy, the twins fell silent. Leo sat up, thumb in his mouth, eyeing his father with a wariness no toddler should ever display toward a parent. Julian halted 3 feet from Valeria. She was petite, barely reaching his shoulder. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail wrecked by her dancing with damp strands plastering themselves to her forehead. Her chest heaved, winded by the exertion and the terror. "Care to explain?" Julian began, his tone low and controlled, but sharpened like a blade. "What on earth is going on here?" Valeria swallowed hard. Her hands still trapped in that ridiculous neon yellow rubber wrung together over her white apron. The boys woke up, sir," she managed, trying to steady her voice. "They were screaming. Another nightmare, the usual one?" "I am aware they were screaming, Valeria. I could hear them from my wing. What I fail to grasp is why. Instead of soothing them, putting them down, or getting warm milk, I walk in to find a—" Julian gestured vaguely dismissively. "A circus act. Do you think this is a nightclub? Do you think I pay you to rehearse your dance routine at 3 in the morning while I try to rest so I can keep this roof over our heads?" It was a low blow, calculated to humiliate her, to remind her of the hierarchy. He expected submission, an apology, a promise to never deviate again. That's what the others always did. They shrank in the face of his wealth and authority. But Valeria didn't cower. She raised her chin, and though her honey-colored eyes swam with unshed tears, a strange fire burned behind them. It was a spark of self-respect Julian hadn't accounted for. "With all due respect, Mr. Costello," she said, her voice finding its footing. "I tried the standard methods. I tried rocking them. I tried the milk. I tried reading that rabbit book you left on the table. Nothing worked. They were screaming like they were being torn apart." Julian furrowed his brow, taken aback by her pushback. "So your brilliant solution was to put on headphones and dance like a lunatic. My solution was to break the pattern," she shot back, stepping toward a crib to fix Teo's blanket as he watched her. "Fear feeds on silence and darkness, sir. When they wake up like that, they're stuck in a loop of panic. If I get stressed, if I try to force them to sleep, they feed off my tension and scream louder. They needed a shock. They needed to see something absurd, something alive." Valeria peeled off the yellow gloves with a wet snap and tossed them onto the changing table. She stripped off the gloves, exposing raw, flushed skin. Those hands told a story of hard labor, yet her nails were kept short and immaculate. Laughter chases the fear away. It's the only thing that works. She didn't look down. Instead, she locked eyes with him, shattering the glass ceiling, separating the tycoon from the help. "You saw the shift. 1 minute they're panic-stricken, the next they're breathing deep and giggling. Their pain stopped. That's the first time tonight they haven't been in agony. You might see a circus act, but I see peace." Julian fell silent. He couldn't find a flaw in her reasoning, and that just fueled his irritation. It burned him inside. A total stranger on the payroll for barely 3 days had tuned into his children's needs in a way he simply couldn't. He imported toys from Germany. He secured the city's top medical specialists. Yet here he stood, not physically in danger, but emotionally cornered. His entire standing as a father and the master of this estate was unraveling because of a girl in a maid's uniform. His face turned to stone. He had to stomp out this rebellion immediately. Giving an inch meant losing the reins completely, and right now control was the only thread holding his life together. "That's a touching philosophy, Valeria," he sneered. He crossed his arms, deliberately catching the light on his Swiss timepiece. "But under this roof we operate on rules, and rule number 1 is absolute order. I won't tolerate clown acts or racket in the middle of the night. My children need structure and discipline, not the impression that tears are a ticket to a carnival." He stepped in close, breaching her personal bubble and looming over her to maximize the intimidation factor. "I'm paying you an exorbitant salary for professionalism. Professional caretakers do not breakdance in dishwashing gloves. They maintain their dignity. Valeria bit her tongue, swallowing a comeback that would definitely get her fired on the spot. She glanced over at the kids. The yawns were starting to catch on. The laughter-induced adrenaline crash was settling into a deep, natural sleep, a rarity around here. "Understood, sir," she murmured. It didn't sound like she was yielding. It sounded like she was pitying him. Julian felt a flicker of shame but squashed it instantly. "Make sure this never happens again," he commanded. "Next time I walk in here, I expect sleeping children and a nanny acting like staff for a high-status household, not some street performer. Do I make myself clear? Crystal, Mr. Costello." "Good." Julian pivoted on his heel with military precision. He marched toward the exit, feeling her eyes boring a hole between his shoulder blades. Hand hovering over the doorknob, he hesitated. A part of him wanted to soften the blow. He knew she was the reason the tears had stopped. But his pride, that fortress he'd erected to survive the agony of losing his wife, wouldn't let the words out. "Kill the lights," he barked without turning around. "And get those gloves back in the kitchen where they belong." He stepped out, pulling the door shut with a quiet final click. Alone in the corridor, Julian sagged against the cold plaster, letting out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for hours. His hands had a slight tremor. He couldn't shake the image of Valeria dancing. That explosion of pure life inside the nursery was branded into his mind. It was a violent contrast to the frozen wasteland his own life had become. He glanced down the hall to the imposing oil painting of his late wife, Elena. She had been the picture of perfection, elegant, restrained, composed. She never would have debased herself by dancing around in rubber gloves. "What the hell am I doing?" Julian muttered, massaging his temples. Inside, Valeria waited until the heavy footsteps faded away. She let out a long sigh, her posture finally slumping. She picked up the yellow gloves like they were sacred relics rather than cleaning supplies. Leaning over Leo's crib, she stroked his soft cheek. "Don't worry, little ones. Your daddy's a grump, but only because his heart is shattered. We'll keep dancing. We'll just be stealthy about it." She slid her headphones back on, playing nothing, just using them to block out the oppressive silence of this gilded, empty cage. She knew exactly what this was. It was a war. A battle between the father's icy grip and the warmth those children were starving for. And Valeria, she might just be the help, but she wasn't raising a white flag. Paranoia is an expensive parasite, and Julian Costello was ready to bankrupt himself to keep it fed. The sun had barely risen after the 3 a.m. incident when a convoy of black vans from a high-end security firm crunched up the gravel driveway. Technicians in gray coveralls swarmed the property tools, clinking on their belts. They drilled into the plaster, snaking invisible wires through the walls and mounting digital eyes in every shadow, focusing heavily on the nursery and the playroom. Julian stood in the center of the grand salon, nursing a black coffee, his jaw set like concrete as he watched the perimeter tighten. He wasn't about to let another disaster happen. If Valeria wanted this paycheck, she'd have to earn it under a microscope. "I want a live feed, phone tablet, and the main desktop," he barked at the head of security. "And get me crystal clear audio. If that woman so much as sighs, I want to hear it." 2 hours later, Julian was perched in his office high atop a glass tower in the heart of the financial district. The view was commanding, the entire metropolis sprawling beneath him like a tribute to his success, but Julian ignored the skyline. His gaze was locked on his tablet, which was propped up against a heavy marble paperweight. The high-definition stream beamed a direct view of the playroom back at the mansion. The scene should have put him at ease, but instead it churned his stomach, a bitter cocktail of envy and intrigue he couldn't quite place. Unlike the previous nannies, Valeria wasn't lounging on the couch scrolling through social media while the boys fended for themselves. She was right down on the floor. She had dismantled the Italian designer sofa, stripping away cushions that cost $6,000 apiece, cushions that were strictly off-limits. In the middle of the room stood a massive fortress. Old bedsheets were draped over floor lamps, fashioning a crude makeshift sanctuary. Julian cranked up the audio. "Hurry, captains!" Valeria's voice crackled through the speakers. "The volcano just erupted, and the carpet is made of lava. Get to the magic cave." Leo and Theo, usually so lethargic, were scrambling toward the pillow fort, eyes wide and shrieking with delight. They dove into the fabric bunker, dragging Valeria in with them. Julian watched as she reached into a basket, pulling out juice bottles and 3 ham and cheese sandwiches all cut into little stars. It wasn't the organic gourmet cuisine his private chef prepared, the stuff the boys always refused to eat. It was simple picnic fare. "We're safe in here," Valeria whispered. The camera caught the moment she pulled both boys close, planting kisses on their sweaty foreheads. "Nothing can hurt us now." The boys devoured the food with a hunger Julian hadn't witnessed in months, giggling with their mouths full. Theo held out a piece of his sandwich for Valeria, and she playfully pretended to bite his finger, sending them into fits of laughter. Julian looked away suddenly, feeling like a stranger in his own life, and glanced down at his desk. A filet mignon and asparagus lunch prepared by executive catering sat on fine china cold and untouched. He was wrapped in luxury silence and success, yet those three sitting on the floor eating cheap bread possessed something his money couldn't buy. They had warmth. Frustrated, he snapped the tablet case shut and left the office 2 hours early that afternoon. He stopped at a high-end toy store and picked up 2 remote-controlled electric cars, exact replicas of his own sports car complete with LED headlights and realistic engine sounds. They were impressive machines carrying a heavy price tag, perfect for purchasing a moment of joy. He arrived home with the massive boxes, feeling like a conqueror returning with spoils of war. He marched into the living room, noting the pillow fort was gone and the space restored to the pristine order he always demanded. Valeria sat on the rug reading aloud while the boys leaned comfortably against her legs. The moment his shadow crossed the threshold, the mood shifted. The air grew heavy. The boys looked up from the book and stiffened. "Look who's home," Julian announced, his forced cheerfulness booming too loudly in the quiet room. "Daddy brought presents." He dropped the boxes and tore through the wrapping, revealing the gleaming cars. "Check this out, Leo. Theo, come here. Way better than some dirty old cushions, right?" He hit the power switch. The toy roared to life with a loud engine noise, its lights flashing aggressively. Julian jammed the joystick forward, and the car shot toward the boys, skidding across the hardwood floor. Instead of rushing the toys, Leo and Theo recoiled in fear. The sudden noise, combined with their father's intense looming presence, was terrifying. Theo burst into tears and sprinted straight for Valeria, burying his face in her apron. Leo followed a split second later, clinging to the nanny's leg like a sailor grasping a lifeline in a storm. Julian stood frozen, controller in hand, watching his own children flee from him to seek safety with the help. The toy car slammed into the wall, its wheels spinning uselessly against the baseboard with an irritating whine. Blood rushed to his face, and he felt completely humiliated in his own living room. "What did you tell them?" Julian asked, killing the controller's power and fixing Valeria with a cold stare. "What kind of poison are you feeding their minds to make them afraid of me?" Valeria, still rubbing Theo's back to soothe him, looked up. The defiance had vanished from her gaze, leaving only a hollow, aching sadness. "I never speak ill of you to them, sir. You're missing the point. They aren't terrified of you. They're terrified of the noise. They flinch because you storm in like a hurricane, bearing gifts demanding instant affection. All they really crave is for you to sit on the carpet and just be there. Don't you dare lecture me on how to raise my own blood." Julian snapped his finger, jabbing the air. "I am their father. I provide everything they could possibly want. This mansion, the designer clothes the mountains of toys. Yes, Mr. Costello, you provide objects." She cut in her voice, soft but shaking. "But objects aren't what they're starving for. They need to know their father exists. They need a hug, not another miniature sports car." The truth hit Julian harder than a physical blow across the face. He wanted to rage, to fire her on the spot for her insolence, but seeing his sons clinging to her apron strings, he realized the alternative was absolute solitude, and that terror outweighed his bruised ego. Silence hung heavy as he spun on his heel, marching out of the room and up the staircase. He retreated to his study, where the security monitors broadcast a live feed of a happy family, a picture-perfect tableau he had no idea how to step into. If Julian was a block of ice, his mother, Doña Mercedes Costello, was the nuclear winter. 3 days later, on a dreary, rain-soaked Tuesday, the estate intercom buzzed with a distinct aristocratic entitlement. The butler announced his mother's arrival. Julian, buried in contracts at the dining table, stiffened instantly. He tightened his tie and smoothed his hair, unconscious tics of a frightened boy desperate to please an impossible matriarch. "Valeria," he barked, the stress bleeding into his voice. "My mother is here. Make sure the boys are spotless. Not a smudge, not a single hair out of place. And for God's sake, blend into the wallpaper. My mother is difficult." Valeria nodded and rushed the children upstairs. She knew the legend of Doña Mercedes. The staff whispered about the woman who judged a person's worth by the stitching on their shoes and the pedigree of their ancestors. 10 minutes later, the double doors swung open. Doña Mercedes swept in like a monarch reclaiming a savage frontier. She was 60 years old, but looked a sculpted 40, courtesy of subtle, exorbitant cosmetic work. She wore a cream Chanel suit and strands of genuine pearls. In her hand was a silver-handled cane utilized less for support and more as a scepter for pointing and passing judgment. "Julian," she greeted, presenting a glacial cheek for a kiss. "This place reeks of dampness. Sack the maintenance crew immediately. Hello, Mother. The house is fine. It's just the storm. Excuses. Perfection does not allow for excuses. Mercedes scanned the foyer with a critical eye. Where are my grandsons? I trust they haven't devolved into feral little beasts since Elena isn't here to keep standards. They're coming down now. Julian replied, the familiar weight of inadequacy crushing his chest. Right on cue, Valeria appeared at the top of the landing with the twins. They were dressed in beige linen suits and crisp white shirts, hair parted with geometric precision. They looked like catalog angels. Valeria descended slowly, gripping a small hand in each of hers. Mercedes narrowed her gaze not at the children, but at the woman escorting them. Is that the new help? Her voice carried through the hall, dripping with acidic disdain. She looks entirely too young, and that uniform is ill-fitting. Where did you dredge her up? A discount staffing agency. Julian cleared his throat awkwardly. She came highly recommended, Mother. The boys have taken a shine to her. Valeria reached the bottom step. She performed a slight curtsy, exactly as trained, though indignation burned in her veins. Good afternoon, madam. I am Valeria. Mercedes didn't even acknowledge her existence. She advanced on the children, inspecting them like livestock at an auction. She dragged a gloved finger across Leo's cheek. Pale, she declared, and scrawny. What are you feeding them, slop? They eat very well, madam, Valeria ventured. Fresh vegetables, lean proteins. I wasn't speaking to you. Mercedes snapped her head, whipping around. Her eyes were abysses of black tar. When I require the opinion of the help, I will request it. Until then, you are invisible. Is that clear? Valeria clamped her mouth shut, the heat of shame rising up her neck. She glanced at Julian, pleading silently for support for him to step in. He was their father, the master of the house, yet Julian stared resolutely at his shoes, fidgeting with his watch. Silence. The corporate titan, the shark of the boardroom, shrank into a minnow in his mother's shadow. Mercedes turned her attention back to the boys. Teo, sensing the malice radiating from the stranger who smelled of harsh chemicals, panicked. He recoiled, burying his face in Valeria's skirt for safety. Mercedes grimaced in revulsion. Release him, the old woman commanded, rapping her cane against the floor tiles. Boy, come here this instant. Get your hands off that woman's skirt. She is hired help, not your kin. People of her station carry filth and uncivilized habits. You are going to soil yourself. Tears pricked Valeria's eyes, fueled not by sorrow but by a burning, helpless fury. Without a thought, her hand flew to Teo's shoulder, a reflex to shield him from the venom. Ma'am, the boy is terrified. Valeria managed her voice trembling, yet resolute. Please, lower your voice. The resulting silence was heavy enough to crush bone. Mercedes's jaw dropped, staring at the girl as if a piece of furniture had suddenly gained the power of speech. Julian, Mercedes intoned, her voice dropping to a glacial chill. Will you stand there while this servant dictates terms in your home to your own mother? Look how far you've fallen. Elena must be turning in her grave watching some nobody raise her sons and insult their grandmother. Julian looked up, the color draining from his face. Bringing Elena into this was a strike below the belt. He glanced at Valeria, seeing her trampled pride and protective stance, then shifted his gaze to his mother, that monument of unshakable authority. Childhood terror seized the reins. Valeria, Julian rasped, take the children to the playroom immediately. It was not a defense, it was a retreat, a total surrender of the battlefield. Valeria's gaze held a disappointment so profound it cut deeper than any blade. Yes, sir, she whispered. Hoisting a boy onto each hip with shocking strength for her slight frame, she fled down the corridor, escaping the poison filling the drawing room. Mercedes' voice chased her down the hall, sharp and venomous. You must fire her, Julian. That girl forgets her place. It's dangerous. Just look at her. She thinks she's their mother. She is nothing but a gold digger exploiting those boys to get her claws into you. Mark my words, cut her loose before it's too late. Inside the playroom, Valeria shut the world out, leaning back against the door until she slid all the way to the floor. She pulled the twins close as they patted her face with tiny hands, their eyes wide with concern. We are just fine, my loves, she lied, forcing a smile as a single tear escaped. The wicked witch cannot enter this kingdom. This is our castle. She brushed the tear away instantly. Falling apart was a luxury she could not afford. She knew her days in this house were numbered as long as that woman held the reins. But for now, she would be their shield, filling the void left by a spineless father. Midnight at the Costello estate always arrived with an accusing silence. Tonight, however, in the wake of Doña Mercedes's visit, the air felt too thick to breathe. Sleep evaded Julian. His mother's words ricocheted around his skull like a rubber ball in an empty chamber. She is a gold digger. Terminate her employment. Elena is turning in her grave. Julian poured his third glass of whiskey shrouded in the gloom of his study. His hand trembled, a symptom not of the alcohol, but of his own cowardice. Self-loathing consumed him. He had failed to defend the only soul capable of bringing laughter to his children in 2 long years. Yet the crushing weight of the Costello legacy, his rigid upbringing, and the shadow of a domineering mother formed chains too heavy to shatter. "Tomorrow," he muttered, staring into the amber depths of his glass. "Tomorrow, I will cut the check and send her away. It is for the best, no more conflict." With that bitter pill swallowed, he exited the study. He needed movement, physical exhaustion to silence his racing mind. He descended the main staircase, bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. The mansion lay in shadow, lit only by garden security floods that filtered through the windows, casting long, ghostly silhouettes of the furniture. As he drifted past the small sitting room adjoining the kitchen, a nook the staff sometimes used for breaks, he noticed a faint glow. He froze. His control instinct flared. A light left burning pure carelessness. He approached with stealth. It was Valeria. She was not in her designated quarters in the basement. She lay on the sitting room sofa, a discarded piece from the main hall. Curled in a fetal ball, she was fast asleep, still in her uniform, minus the apron. The baby monitor sat active on the coffee table, humming with soft static, while her hand dangled limply toward the floor. Julian studied her. In slumber, she appeared even more youthful. The defensive walls she maintained while awake had crumbled, revealing a bone-deep, chronic exhaustion. She did not resemble a calculating fortune hunter. She looked like a child worn down by a war far too large for her. He prepared to turn on his heel and leave her be, but an object on the floor snagged his attention. Directly beneath her dangling fingertips lay a small, cheap plastic photo frame, silver-painted, which seemed to have slipped from her grasp as she drifted off. It lay face down. Curiosity, that treacherous impulse, compelled Julian to step closer. He justified the invasion of privacy by telling himself he had a duty to know exactly who he was welcoming into his home. Maybe she had a secret lover, hidden children, a criminal record. He lowered himself slowly, sparing his aching knees, and picked up the frame. It was still warm to the touch. He angled it to catch the moonlight spilling through the window. The tumbler of scotch slipped from his other hand. The heavy crystal hit the carpet with a dull thud, amber liquid bleeding out to stain the fibers. Julian didn't notice the mess. His lungs had seized up. It felt as if an invisible fist had slammed into his solar plexus, knocking the wind out of him. The photo wasn't of a boyfriend or a son. It was a vintage shot, colors washed out by time, set against the backdrop of a theater stage. 2 figures stood frozen in the frame. They were locked in an embrace, beaming with the kind of raw, triumphant joy that follows a great victory. One was a teenager, maybe 17, willow-thin. She wore a black rehearsal tutu, hair pulled back in a severe bun. It was Valeria, but a version of her he didn't recognize. Her eyes burned with ambition. She stood tall, proud, clutching a bouquet of crimson roses to her chest. The woman holding her, the one wrapping her in a mother's proud hug and facing the lens with that radiant smile Julian had tried so hard to scrub from his memory just to survive the grief, was Elena, his wife. Julian's legs gave out and he collapsed onto the whiskey-soaked rug. He brought the photograph to his face, desperate to find a flaw, a trick of the shadows. But the truth was undeniable. It was Elena. She was wearing the sapphire pendant he'd given her for their 5th anniversary. The memory of that night came rushing back. The year-end gala at the Costello Arts Foundation, the charity Elena had poured her soul into. "Oh, God," Julian choked out. He flipped the frame over. Wedged between the backing and the plastic was a folded scrap of paper, yellowed with age. He pulled it out with trembling fingers. The handwriting hit him like a physical blow, the sweeping, graceful script that used to greet him on the bathroom mirror. It read, "To my little butterfly Valeria. Don't ever let them clip your wings. You have the gift. You will dance in Paris, I promise you. With love, your mentor and friend Elena." The date was scrawled at the bottom. October 15th, 2021. He squeezed his eyes shut as the tsunami of memory crashed over him. October 15th, 2 weeks before the end. 2 weeks before her car hydroplaned off the road in the pouring rain. A vague memory of Elena surfaced. She was always going on about some student. "Julian, you have to see her," she used to say over dinner, her eyes bright with excitement. "I've got this girl at the foundation. She's from a rough neighborhood, but when she dances Julian, When she dances, the whole world stands still. I'm finalizing a full ride for her at the Paris Conservatory. This is going to be my legacy." He hadn't listened. He was too busy acquiring skyscrapers, closing mergers, chasing wealth. He just nodded and muttered, "That's nice, darling." He never heard a word. That student was Valeria. The realization slammed down like a judge's gavel. After Elena passed, he had spiraled into a black hole of depression and apathy. He shuddered. The charity cut the funding, fired the team. "I want every trace of her gone," he had instructed his legal team. And by closing the doors, he had killed the scholarships. He looked over at the woman sleeping on the sofa, the servant in rubber gloves. He was the one who had clipped her wings. He had torched her future in Paris. The prodigy who should be performing in Europe's grandest halls was here scrubbing vomit off the floor, enduring his mother's verbal abuse for a pittance, working for the very man who had unknowingly destroyed her life. And despite it all, she was here nurturing the children of the woman who loved her, dancing for them at 3 a.m. to chase away the monsters. Bile rose in his throat. The shame was a searing heat. He wasn't just a terrible employer, he was the villain in her tragedy. Valeria stirred, letting out a soft sigh. Julian froze in the darkness. He couldn't look her in the eye, not with this truth burning his skin. With agonizing slowness, he placed the photo back on the floor precisely where he had found it and retreated into the gloom, dragging a burden of guilt that no amount of money could alleviate. Morning arrived in shades of steel gray, finding Julian still anchored to his desk chair. He had spent the last 4 hours digging through digital graveyards, files he hadn't touched in years. It was all there. The dossier on Valeria Munoz, father unknown, mother, chronically ill, address in the slums. But it was Elena's marginal notes that tore him apart. "Valeria needs proper shoes. Hers are falling apart. I'm buying them myself. She possesses raw, unfiltered genius, yet her pantry is empty. We must increase her nutritional grant immediately." Julian absorbed every syllable like a man serving a sentence, finally grasping the true nature of the performance he had witnessed hours earlier. It wasn't just some foolish jig. Those fluid arm extensions, the precise pirouettes, they were snippets of Swan Lake watered down to evoke giggles from infants, yet delivered with the discipline of a veteran who had spent a lifetime bleeding before a studio mirror. At 7 a.m, the kitchen stirred to life. He rose, his joints popping in protest, feeling a decade older than he had when the sun went down. He descended the staircase with a heavy resolve. Terminating her employment was off the table, yet revealing his hand was equally dangerous. If she suspected he knew the truth of her identity, the shame might drive her away, and that was a risk he could not take. Subtlety was key. He needed to rewrite the terms of their arrangement without tipping his hand, so he took a breath and stepped into the kitchen. The rich aroma of brewing coffee and toasted bread hit him, a scent of domestic warmth that had been a ghost in these halls for far too long. Valeria stood with her back to him, mixing formula, her uniform pristine once more, and her hair pulled back into a severe professional bun. The sound of his approach made her freeze, her shoulders hitching up toward her ears in an instant reflex of dread. Bracing herself for shouting or a severance check, she turned slowly with her gaze fixed on the floor and murmured, "Good morning, Mr. Costello. The children's meal is nearly prepared. I have my bags packed just in case, given what your mother said yesterday." Julian paused by the marble island, studying her not as a servant in blue, but as a person. He saw the prodigy from the photograph, the shattered potential, and the hands that were raw and red from harsh chemicals and endless scrubbing. Those fingers were meant to sculpt air into art, not scour floors, and the realization lodged a hard lump in his throat he struggled to swallow. "No one is leaving Valeria," he stated, his voice emerging raspier than usual, stripped of its typical steel-cold edge. Valeria snapped her head up, her honey-colored eyes widening in sheer disbelief. "Forgive me, but your mother said—" "My mother does not reside here." Julian cut in, finally finding strength rather than fear in that declaration. "This is my home, and these are my children. They haven't cracked a genuine smile in 2 years until you walk through that door." He took a deliberate step forward, causing Valeria to instinctively retreat until her back pressed against the countertop. Julian halted, honoring the boundary, his posture softening from that of the imperious master looking down on a subject. His shoulders slumped, his expression turning to one of plea. He hesitated, desperate to ask her about Elena. He wanted to scream for forgiveness, but choked it back. "What you did the other night, the dancing." A deep crimson flushed her cheeks as she stared at her worn-out shoes. "I am sorry, sir. It won't happen again." "No," Julian corrected, firm yet gentle. "I want it to happen. I need you to dance." Valeria's head jerked up in confusion. "What?" "That silly routine." Julian groped for the right words, battling the rising tide of emotion. My wife, Elena. She adored ballet. She used to glide through these rooms just like that when joy took her. Seeing you for a split second, I thought the light had returned to this dark place." Valeria's expression shifted, the mask of terror melting away to reveal raw, naked feeling. Tears pooled in her eyes. She knew exactly who he was speaking of. She had always known he was the husband of her beloved mentor. That was the very reason she had applied to repay a fraction of Elena's kindness, even if it meant caring for her children from the shadows of a servant's life. "Mrs. Elena," Valeria whispered, and the name hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge connecting their grief. She always said, "Dance is the language of the soul when words are not enough." Julian nodded, his throat too tight for speech. "My boys need that language," he finally managed to rasp out. "They need someone to speak to their souls because I have forgotten how. I only know the currency of wealth and silence, and it is destroying them." A long pause followed, but the heaviness had lifted. It was a silence of shared understanding. The barrier separating the tycoon and the nanny had finally cracked. Julian no longer viewed her as a liability to be managed, but as the only salvation available. His entire perspective had shifted. This wasn't about hiring a babysitter anymore. He was staring at a moral debt he had to repay. He was now on a mission to protect this young woman, to atone for the harm he had unknowingly caused. "Please stay, Valeria," he said, his tone bordering on begging. Not as a terrified employee walking on eggshells. Stay and help them. Help me figure them out. Do whatever it takes, dance, sing, build fortresses out of the expensive upholstery. I don't care about the mess, just don't leave. Valeria studied him for a long moment. She recognized the anguish in his gaze, the very same sorrow she had seen in Elena's eyes when she spoke of her workaholic husband, and she nodded slowly. "I will stay, sir, for Leo and Teo." Julian exhaled, feeling the crushing weight of the world lift from his shoulders. "Thank you," he murmured. He turned to walk away, but froze right there in the kitchen doorway, gripping the frame. Keeping his back to her, he added, "And Valeria, toss those yellow cleaning gloves. We'll get new ones. And maybe, just maybe, a pair of ballet slippers to go with them. The hardwood floor in the living room, it's perfect for pirouettes." He was gone before she could reply, fleeing before she caught a glimpse of his iron facade crumbling. Valeria stood frozen, knuckles white against the countertop, her heart thundering in her chest while a fragile, hopeful smile slowly graced her lips. It turned out the monster wasn't really a monster at all. He was just broken. The next 2 weeks at the Costello estate felt like a slow, surreal awakening, watching a 1,000-year-old glacier finally begin to thaw. Julian ceased to be a ghost slipping in and out of the shadows. His presence became solid, undeniable, even if he still felt a bit awkward in his own home. He started walking through the front door at 5 in the afternoon, a habit that completely baffled his secretary and put the board of directors on edge. Mr. Costello leaving before the market closed. It sounded impossible. And yet, it was happening. That Tuesday, Julian walked in with his tie already loosened, a casualness that started the moment he got into his car. He had something tucked in his jacket pocket, a small weight that felt like it was burning a hole right through to his chest. It wasn't jewelry or a fat check. It was 2 pairs of non-slip socks with little frogs on them for the twins and a USB drive hidden underneath. The usual silence of the house was gone. Classical music, one of Tchaikovsky's waltzes, swept through the marble foyer. The notes bounced off the high walls, finally making the place feel less like a cold museum and more like a home where people actually lived. He followed the melody to the main living room. The designer sofas had been shoved up against the walls, clearing a wide open space across the polished parquet floor. Golden hour sunlight streamed through the tall windows, bathing the entire scene in a warm, nostalgic amber glow. Valeria stood right in the center barefoot, wearing simple sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt. Her movements were liquid and precise, possessing a technical grace that knocked the wind right out of Julian. She pirouetted with a natural grace that clashed heartbreakingly with her uniform and her reality as the hired help. Nearby, Leo and Teo tried to mimic her moves, throwing their little arms up before toppling backward onto the cushions, shrieking with laughter. Julian stood frozen in the doorway, mesmerized. In Valeria's sway, he saw the ghost of Elena. He saw the scholarship promise he'd personally shattered. A sharp pang of remorse stabbed at him, but he shoved it down. Tonight wasn't about guilt. It was about building a bridge. Valeria sensed his presence and froze mid-spin, dropping her arms as the music played on. "Mr. Costello," she stammered, smoothing her t-shirt and pulling her professional mask back on. "You're back early. I apologize for the chaos. I'll put the furniture back right now." "Don't!" Julian interrupted, stepping into the room, his voice commanding yet unusually gentle. "Leave it. It's perfect." For the first time, Leo and Teo didn't scramble to hide behind Valeria's legs at the sight of their father. They just stood there clad in nothing but diapers and tiny shirts, eyeing him with pure curiosity. Valeria's patience had melted away the heavy atmosphere of fear over the last few days, yet an invisible wall still stood between them. Julian peeled off his $3,000 blazer and let it slide carelessly onto a Louis XV chair. Then, with slightly trembling hands, he kicked off his Italian leather shoes, leaving himself standing in dark socks on the polished hardwood. Valeria watched him, eyes wide, unable to process what was unfolding. "Valeria." Julian started feeling exposed and foolish without his corporate armor. "They follow your lead. They look at you like you're magic. To them, I'm just a stranger. I'm the man who supplies the toys, but I have no clue how to actually play with them." He looked at his sons, who stared back as if an alien had just crash-landed in their living room. "Teach me," he pleaded. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "Show me how to do that, how to dance with them. I need to get into their world." Valeria blinked, stunned by the raw humility coming from the same man who had threatened to fire her just days ago. A soft, genuine warmth spread across her face. "It isn't hard, sir. You just have to stop thinking." She walked over to the stereo and restarted the track. The waltz began its gentle swell once more. The trouble with grown-ups is they worry too much about appearances. Children don't care if you look silly. They only care that you're right there being silly with them. Julian swallowed hard, ripped his tie loose, and cast it to the floor. He rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. "All right, I'm ready. What now?" Valeria swept her arms upward. "Picture a tree, a massive one. A mighty oak with branches dancing in the breeze. Don't lock your joints. You are stiff as concrete, Mr. Julian. You need to be sapwood pliable." Julian hoisted his arms. He felt utterly foolish, heavy even. Years of boardroom stress and gym weights had wired his muscles for tension, not flow. His body rebelled against the softness. "No, not like that," Valeria laughed. It was a pure sound completely devoid of malice. Julian watched Leo, who was mimicking Valeria by furiously flapping his arms. Julian looked at his son and for the first time in forever actually smiled, a real smile that finally reached his eyes. "Fine, I'm a tree," Julian muttered, starting to sway back and forth. At first his movements were stiff like a rusted automaton, but then Valeria began circling him and the twins started weaving through his legs, shrieking, "Papa Tree! Papa Tree!" Teo stumbled and latched onto Julian's leg to keep from hitting the floor. Julian froze for a heartbeat at the contact, but instinct took over. He crouched down and scooped Teo up into his arms. The boy didn't cry. Instead, the child pressed his sticky palms against Julian's face and giggled. "Up!" Teo yelled. "Me too!" Leo shouted from below, tugging at his father's trousers. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs, filled with a euphoria that no multi-million-dollar merger had ever provided. He scooped Leo up with his other arm, holding both his sons tight. They were heavy, solid, and smelled of milk and baby powder. "Now, spin, sir," Valeria encouraged, clapping her hands. "Spin with them." Julian started turning slowly at first, then gathered speed. The room began to whirl, the expensive furniture and crystal chandeliers dissolving into a smear of color. All that existed was the sound of his sons laughing and Valeria's bright eyes watching them from the center of the room with infinite tenderness. In that moment, Julian's feet got tangled. His balance betrayed him. He toppled backward onto the plush rug, instinctively clutching the boys against his chest to break their fall. The impact was heavy but muffled. Julian lay flat on his back, winded, with both children sprawled on top of him. Silence hung in the air for a second. Julian was terrified he had scared them, but then Leo let out an explosive belly laugh. "Again! Again, Papa!" he shouted, thumping Julian's chest with excitement. Julian began to chuckle, a deep, rusty sound rising from his core, finally releasing 2 years of grief and bitterness. He laughed until his ribs ached, eyes welling up with tears that had nothing to do with sadness. Valeria walked over and knelt beside them. She didn't intrude on the moment, but simply existed within it. "You did very well for your first lesson, Mr. Tree," she said softly. Julian looked up at her from the floor, his hair a mess and his shirt rumpled. "Thank you, Valeria," he whispered. Those simple words carried an unspoken acknowledgement of everything she was restoring to him, life itself. For an instant, their gazes locked and held. In that second, social standing past history and debts vanished. They were just two human beings sharing the joy of happy children. Julian felt a strange surge, a gratitude so immense it bordered on love, but a different kind born of salvation. But the spell broke when a distant, low and menacing roll of thunder rumbled outside, rattling the window panes. Happiness is a fragile thing, and that night nature decided to remind the Costello family of that fact with ruthless brutality. What began as a sunset waltz transformed into a midnight horror opera. The storm that had been looming since the afternoon erupted over the city with biblical violence. The wind howled as it battered the mansion, bending the ancient trees in the garden as if they were twigs. Rain fell in sheets so thick the outside world simply vanished. Julian woke at 2 a.m, not because of the storm's noise but because of a terrifying silence. The power was out. The smart mansion, dependent on complex systems for everything, was dead and dark. Then he heard the crying, not the usual tantrum or nightmare, but a weak, whimpery, sickly sound. Julian leaped out of bed, his shaking hands fumbling to turn on his phone's flashlight. He sprinted down the hall. When he reached the nursery, he found Valeria already there, illuminated by a single emergency candle. Her face was pale and drawn. "They're burning up, sir," she said. Her voice trembled. "Their fever is high, way too high." Julian rushed to the cribs and touched Leo's forehead. It was scorching. It felt like touching a hot stove. The boy was struggling to breathe, gasping, his eyes half open but glassy and unfocused. Teo was the same, letting out low moans, his skin red and dry. "Call the doctor!" Julian shouted. Panic seized him. The memory of Elena's death, cold and motionless on a gurney, slammed into him. He couldn't lose them too. He just couldn't. "Call Dr. Arriaga right now." "There's no line, sir," Valeria replied, fighting to stay calm. "The landlines are dead, and there's no cell signal. The storm must have knocked out the local towers." Julian stared at his useless phone. "Damn it!" he roared, hurling the device against the sofa. He rushed the glass. Outside, the world was just a wall of obsidian rain. "I'm driving them myself. The private clinic is 20 minutes out. We make a run for it." "You can't." Valeria's grip on his forearm was shocking steel beneath the uniform. "I checked 10 minutes ago. The driveway is gone. An oak took out the front gate and the creek has already breached its banks. We're completely cut off, sir. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out." Julian froze the marble floor beneath him, feeling suddenly like a trap door. He was the region's wealthiest titan. He owned fleets, choppers, and kept surgeons on retainer, yet right now his empire was dust. All that wealth was just meaningless paper against the fire burning inside his sons. "I'm going to lose them," Julian wheezed, eyes wide and hollow, backing into the wall as his breath came in short, jagged gasps. "They're burning up. The seizures will start next. I did this. God help me, I did this." The panic was a physical weight crushing him into inaction. He was regressing, shrinking into a terrified child right before her eyes. Valeria saw the collapse happening in real time. The boys needed a protector, but their father was shattering into pieces. That was when the girl from the slums, the survivor who raised a house full of siblings while her mother scrubbed floors, stepped up. "Julian," she dropped the honorifics, her voice cracking through the room like a whip. "Look at me. Right now." The shock snapped him back to reality. "They aren't going to die. But I need you to stop playing the helpless tycoon and start being a father." "Move?" What do I do?" he stammered. "Vinegar. Fetch clean towels, then fill the tub. Lukewarm water, not cold, not hot. Lukewarm. Go." Valeria barked the order as she scooped Leo up, pressing him to her heart to ground him. Julian nodded, desperate for a mission, any mission. He sprinted to the master bath and wrenched the handles. Water flowed a mercy of the gravity-fed backup tank. He grabbed the linens and dashed into the blackened kitchen, slamming his shin hard against a stool. He didn't even flinch. He located the apple cider vinegar and bolted back to the suite. Valeria was already stripping the boys, down her hands a blur of efficiency. Candlelight threw long dancing shadows across the imported Italian marble. "Get in the water with them," she commanded. "Excuse me. Your body temperature is lower. You'll act as a heat sink. They need skin-to-skin contact to cool down and they need to feel safe. Get in." Julian didn't hesitate. He climbed into the oversized tub, ruined silk pajamas be damned. The water was tepid. She handed him Leo, then Teo, and he pulled them tight against his soaked chest. As the boys shivered violently, Valeria rolled up her sleeves and soaked the cloths in the vinegar solution. Gently, she applied the compresses to their foreheads, armpits, and groins, the heat points. The sharp, acidic tang of vinegar overwhelmed the room's expensive perfumes, a peasant remedy invading a palace. "Shh," "It's okay. My love's fading," she cooed, stroking Teo's damp hair, but Leo wailed louder, a raw sound of pure misery. Julian felt the tiny body go rigid against him. "Valeria, it's not working." His voice fractured. "They're still burning up." "Have faith, sir. Old ways are slow, but they work." She worked like a machine, cycling the cloths, stirring the water, never pausing for a second. Then, to cut through the thick electric terror in the room, she began to sing. It wasn't a standard nursery rhyme. It was haunting low and filled with a fierce, quiet hope. An old ballad about a ship lost in a gale and the star that leads it home. "Sleep now, child, the tide is turning. The moon watches the silver embraces." Julian, clutching his sons in the water, felt a chill run through his spine that defied the heat of the fever. He knew that melody. Elena used to hum it when she carried them, a lullaby she'd inherited from her own grandmother generations ago. Water dripped down Julian's face, indistinguishable from his silent tears as he looked up. Through the flickering candlelight, he really saw her. She was lost in the song, eyes closed, pouring every ounce of her soul into his children. In that instant, he realized she wasn't just breaking a fever. She was keeping the ghost of his family alive. She was the bridge. She held the wisdom, the love, and the strength he thought had died in the wreckage of the accident. Hours drifted by in the semi-darkness. The gale screamed outside, battering the walls, but the bathroom remained an untouchable sanctuary. Julian anchored his sons while Valeria watched over them all. Around 5 in the morning, Leo let out a long, heavy sigh and went limp against Julian's chest. "He's sweating," Valeria whispered, her hand resting on the boy's brow. "The fever broke, sir." Julian reached for his son. Cool. Damp, but definitely cool. He checked Teo immediately. His heat was fading too. Julian let his head fall back against the cold porcelain rim, a raw, guttural sob tearing from his throat. Pure relief. "Thank you," he choked out. "Thank God," Valeria breathed. She sat on the bathroom floor, spine pressed against the vanity cabinet, utterly spent. She was drenched to the bone, mascara streaking her cheeks, hair plastered to her skull, and reeking of sharp vinegar. Yet to Julian, watching from the tub with his survivors cradled in his arms, she had never looked more radiant or more formidable. "You did this, sir?" she whispered, a weary smile touching her lips. "You were their safe harbor." "No," Julian countered, locking eyes with her, his gaze holding a frightening new intensity. "It was you. You saved us all." In the damp, heavy dark of that bathroom, as the storm outside lost its rage, Julian knew the wall of the icy executive had crumbled for good. That night, Valeria had shifted from employee to lifeline, someone he wasn't sure he could exist without anymore. The hush that followed the thunder was strangely the loudest sound Julian had ever known. This wasn't the hollow, echoing void of his usual solitude. It was thick, warm, and shared, woven from the bone-deep exhaustion of two souls who had just wrestled death and won. In the nursery, a single candle burned low on the dresser, casting dancing shadows across the cloud-painted ceiling. The air still carried the tang of vinegar and dampness, but the stench was gone. Now, it just smelled like life, like survival. Julian and Valeria dried the twins with the gentleness of a prayer. They wrestled them into fresh, soft cotton pajamas and settled them back into their cribs. Leo and Teo, worn out by fever and tears, dropped instantly into that deep, rhythmic slumber only angels know. Julian stood sentinel by Leo's crib hand, gripping the wooden rail, eyes glued to the rise and fall of that tiny chest. His silk pajamas clung to his frame, sodden and heavy. The chill was sinking into his marrow, but he didn't care. He was rooted to the spot, terrified that if he blinked, the heat would spike again. "They're all right, sir," a gentle voice floated from behind him. Julian turned slowly. Valeria was on the thick rug legs, sprawled, head resting against the side of the nursing chair. She looked like a soldier post-battle uniform, rumpled hair a chaotic cascade over her shoulders, feet bare and pale. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes, but the gaze itself held a strange, luminous peace. Julian bypassed the chair and sank to the floor right there on the rug beside her. The gap between employer and employee, that invisible wall built by money and class, had completely washed away with the bathwater. "I was afraid," Julian confessed. His voice cracked rough and broken, a vulnerability he'd never show the board of directors, let alone the nanny. "I was absolutely terrified. When I felt that burning skin, I saw Elena. I saw the hospital room. I saw that monitor flatlining. I felt so useless. All my money, the skyscrapers, the Swiss accounts, couldn't lower their fever by a single degree." He scrubbed his face with his hands, pressing hard against his eyes. "I'm a failure, Valeria. I didn't know what to do. I froze. If you hadn't been here..." Valeria shifted, leaning into his space. Candlelight caught half her face, painting her like a Renaissance saint. "You didn't freeze, Julian," she said, dropping the title for the second time. It sounded as natural as breathing. "You got in that tub. You held them. They calmed down because they felt your pulse, not mine. A father isn't the guy with all the answers. He's the one who stays when the hurricane hits. And you stayed." Julian looked up. He found only deep understanding in her eyes, devoid of judgment. "You knew exactly what to do," he said, awe coloring his tone. "That song, where did you learn it?" Valeria looked down at her hands resting in her lap. A sad smile touched her lips. "A wonderful woman taught me," she whispered. "She used to say songs are maps to find your way home when you're lost. She saved me 1,000 times, just like you saved your sons tonight." A lump formed in Julian's throat. He knew she was talking about Elena. He wanted to tell her he knew that he'd seen the photo, that he recognized the butterfly his wife used to talk about, but the moment was too fragile for facts. "Thank you," was all he managed. "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." Julian scooted closer, closing the gap to inches. He could see the flecks of gold in her irises. "You gave me back my sons. And I think you're giving me back to myself. I've been a ghost for 2 years, Valeria. Walking, signing checks, breathing, but dead inside. Today, watching you care for them, hearing you sing, I felt like I was finally waking up." The atmosphere between them shifted heavy with a static charge, a tension that wasn't base or physical, but profoundly human and spiritual. It was the magnetic pull of two damaged souls finding their reflection in one another, bound by shared suffering and a fragile kind of hope. Julian hesitated, his hand hovering for a moment before he bridged the gap, grazing Valeria's cheek with infinite gentleness. Her skin felt cool to the touch, yet a vibrant warmth pulsed beneath it, and she didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, her eyes fluttered shut. She released a soft breath and leaned into his palm, welcoming the contact like a precious offering. "You aren't dead," she whispered, her gaze locking onto his deep, honest pools of truth. "There is so much love locked away inside you, Julian. You are just terrified that letting it out will bring more pain. But love isn't a finite resource. The more you give, the more it grows." A single lonely tear escaped, tracing a path down Julian's face. Valeria reached up with a hand roughened by hard labor and brushed the teardrop away with her thumb. That simple act of tenderness obliterated the outside world. "Please, don't ever leave," he begged, his voice barely a whisper. "As long as I'm needed, I'm here," she vowed. Then the weight of the physical and emotional toll finally crashed down on them. There were no passionate embraces or sudden moves, just the crushing gravity of pure exhaustion taking over. Julian tipped his head back against the armchair, and Valeria rested hers against the cushion right beside him. There, in the dim light of the nursery, with the sharp scent of vinegar fading into the background, and the candles flickering out one by one, the wealthy heir and the caretaker drifted off on the floor, shoulder to shoulder, bound by an invisible tether far stronger than any employment agreement. Morning sunlight invaded the room with rude brilliance, completely indifferent to the life-or-death struggle of the night before. Birds chirped outside, oblivious to the fact that just hours ago, their world had felt like it was ending. Julian roused first, his neck stiff and his body aching from the unforgiving floorboards. Blinking against the glare, he tried to orient himself, his gaze landing immediately on the cribs. Leo and Theo were sleeping soundly, their cheeks flushed with healthy color. The fever had vanished completely. The sigh of relief that escaped Julian was so deep it physically hurt. He turned his head to the side. Valeria was still asleep, curled into a tight ball on the rug. A stray lock of hair draped over her face, making her look incredibly innocent and vulnerable. A wave of fierce protectiveness washed over him as the memories of the previous night, the closeness, the vow, came flooding back. A small smile played on his lips. Everything changed today. He was going to make this official. He would stand up to his mother. He would finally do the right thing. He rose slowly, careful not to disturb her rest. He desperately needed a shower to wash away the scent of dried sweat and vinegar. He wanted to look human again when she woke up. He planned to make her breakfast himself, pour her coffee, and treat her like an equal. Slipping out of the nursery, he left the door cracked to keep an ear out for the boys and headed toward the master suite. He stepped under the spray, letting the hot water rinse away the night's terror completely, unaware that the real storm was about to breach the front entrance. Downstairs in the foyer, the massive oak doors swung open. Doña Mercedes Castillo marched in her heels, clicking sharply against the floor, trailed by her large, silent chauffeur. Emergency crews had cleared the roads at daybreak, and Mercedes, driven by maternal intuition, or more accurately, an obsession with control, had decided to inspect her son's property for storm damage. "Julian," she called out. Silence. Mercedes frowned, her eyes darting to the mud tracked into the entryway. She spotted towels strewn across the hallway, discarded in last night's panic. "What an absolute mess. This place is a pigsty," she hissed with revulsion. She ascended the stairs, guided by a predatory instinct. Passing the master suite, she heard the shower running. Good, at least he's washing up, she thought. She continued down the hall to the nursery and pushed the door open. The scene inside froze her in place, her eyes narrowing into venomous slits. There on the floor of her grandchildren's room, sleeping like a vagrant in a nest of tangled blankets, lay that woman, disheveled and rumpled. And then she saw the damning evidence. Julian's silk pajama top lay discarded on the floor just feet away. Mercedes' twisted imagination didn't need any more context. To her, the math was simple and sordid: the help, the overnight stay, the discarded clothes, the proximity. She muttered a curse hatred vibrating through her clenched teeth and marched into the room with purpose. Caring little for the sleeping children, she raised her cane and brought it down hard on Valeria's leg. "On your feet!" she shrieked, her shrill voice shattering the morning peace. Valeria jolted awake, heart hammering against her ribs, finding the dark silhouette of Mercedes looming over her, a grim shadow cut against the window light like a fairy tale villain. "Ma'am," Valeria stammered, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Is something wrong?" "The boys—" "Don't you dare," Mercedes hissed. "Do not speak of my grandsons with that filth on your tongue." The older woman gripped Valeria's arm, her strength shocking dark red nails digging into flesh. "I knew you were a social climber. I knew you were cheap, but this is vile. I don't understand." Valeria struggled to pull away, but Mercedes yanked her back hard. The commotion roused Leo and Teo, their confused whimpers quickly turning into wails. Terrorized by their grandmother's rage, the twins screamed. "Just look at yourself," Mercedes spat, gesturing at the disarray. "Rolling around on the nursery floor with my son like an animal. Do you take me for a fool? You think I haven't seen your little game? You used the storm, didn't you? You saw an opportunity while trapped here to crawl into his bed or worse, drag him down into the dirt with you." "No!" Valeria cried out, hot tears of injustice stinging her eyes. "It wasn't like that. The babies had fevers. We stayed up nursing them. Julian only helped me don't twist his kindness into something ugly." The slap came out of nowhere, sharp, brutal, and loud. The force of it whipped Valeria's face to the side, her cheek instantly on fire. "My son is a gentleman. You are help. You probably drugged my grandsons or faked a sickness just to seduce your employer." Mercedes spun toward the hallway and barked, "Roberto! Remove this garbage from my house, now!" The chauffeur stepped into the room, his face a stone mask. "Ma'am, please," Valeria begged. "Just listen. Let me speak to Julian." She stumbled back toward the cribs, instinctively trying to shield the sobbing toddlers. "He has nothing to say to you," Mercedes sneered. "He's in the shower right now, scrubbing your filth off his skin. I will handle the explanation. Get her out of my sight, Roberto. Toss her rags in the gutter where they belong." The driver clamped a heavy hand onto Valeria's arm. She fought against his grip, eyes darting frantically to the doorway, praying for a miracle. Julian, help." She screamed his name, but the roar of the shower down the hall buried her voice. "Silence!" Mercedes stepped in to block her view. "If you ever come near this estate again, if you even look at my son, I will ruin you. I own the police in this town, little girl. I can have you rotting in a cell for theft, child abuse, anything I invent. Do we understand each other? Vanish." At her nod, the chauffeur hauled Valeria out of the room. She stumbled, knees crashing onto the hallway floor, but he hoisted her up like a rag doll. "My babies," she choked out. Behind her, the twins' cries shifted into terrified shrieks as they watched their protector being dragged away. Mercedes slammed the nursery door shut, sealing herself in with the weeping children. She ignored their distress, smug in her successful purge. Roberto dragged her down the grand staircase, dragging her feet across the very marble where she had waltzed in pure happiness only hours ago. He shoved her through the heavy front entrance. Valeria sprawled onto the damp gravel of the driveway, skin tearing on her palms and knees. Her handbag, grabbed from the service entry, landed in the dirt beside her. "The madam says stay away," the man grunted. He pulled the massive door shut with a dull, heavy thud that sounded final, like the closing of a tomb. Valeria lay there under the mocking brightness of the morning sun, her body aching. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. She cast one desperate look toward the second-floor window. She waited to see Julian's face, prayed he would burst through the doors and save her like a hero in a storybook. But the glass remained empty. Inside, Julian twisted the faucet off, wrapping a warm towel around his waist, feeling reborn and ready to start his life over. He hummed the soft melody of last night's lullaby as he dried his hair. He was blissfully unaware that just 2 floors down, the love of his life had been violently excised from his world, and his sons were once again at the mercy of the monster in Chanel. Julian stepped out of his suite, buttoning a crisp white shirt with unusual haste as he strode down the corridor. He felt weightless. For the first time in 2 years, the house didn't feel like a mausoleum. He was going to ask Valeria to join them for breakfast on the terrace. Today, he would shatter the wall between master and servant. He would tell her he knew everything about the scholarship about Elena and that he was going to make it right. But as he neared the nursery door, that buoyancy vanished. The silence he expected was gone, replaced by a sonic wall of chaos. Leo and Teo were screaming not the whimpers of sickness but the shrill, hysterical wails of abandonment, punctured by the crash of shattering objects. Julian sprinted the final few yards and threw the door open. The scene before him made his blood run cold. The nursery was absolute carnage, with the crib sheets ripped violently from the mattresses. Toys littered the floor, yet amidst the wreckage sat his mother, Doña Mercedes. She occupied the reading chair with the posture of a queen, flipping through an architecture journal as if the world wasn't burning down around her. Down on the rug, the twins were huddled together, clinging to the crib slats like prisoners, their little faces flushed crimson and puffy from screaming. They kept their eyes glued to the entrance, begging for a savior. The moment they spotted Julian, the wailing hit a fever pitch as they desperately reached their tiny arms out to him. "Dada babe," Leo shrieked, struggling to form Valeria's name with his toddler tongue. "Babe." Ignoring the woman in the chair, Julian rushed straight to his boys. He dropped to his knees, scooping them into a crushingly tight embrace. They were shivering. "I've got you. Daddy's here." He rained soothing kisses on their sweat-dampened hair. "Where is Valeria?" At the mention of her name, Teo pointed a trembling finger toward the hallway and let out a howl of pure heartbreak. Julian turned slowly, locking eyes with his mother. Mercedes calmly shut her magazine, removed her reading glasses, and placed them deliberately on the side table. "Stop coddling them, Julian. A good cry. Ande. Expands avor buhangs." "Where is Valeria?" Julian repeated, his voice dropping to a menacing register he had never dared use on her before. Mercedes sighed, smoothing out the wrinkles in her Chanel suit. "Gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "She was right here 20 minutes ago. She was asleep on this very rug after saving your grandchildren's lives." Mercedes let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Oh, please. Don't be such a simpleton. That girl didn't save anyone. She staged a dramatic little scene just to warm her way into your bed. I found her sprawled on the floor like a common strumpet, your clothes scattered nearby, so I fired her. I did this family a favor before she bled your accounts dry or infected you with some ghetto disease." Julian rose to his feet, movement slow and deliberate. The twins clung to his trousers, sobbing into the fabric. A scorching heat crept up his neck, a volcanic rage suppressed by 34 years of obedience and etiquette. "You threw her out?" he asked, unable to process the cruelty. "You threw her onto the street. I instructed the chauffeur to remove her, and don't give me that look, you should be thanking me. I've already contacted the international agency. A French governess arrives tomorrow, a certified mature woman who understands discipline. There will be no more vulgar dancing or singing nonsense." Julian looked at his mother. He finally truly saw her. He saw the diamonds, the flawless makeup, the glacial indifference in her eyes. Then he looked down at his sons, shattered by grief, on the floorboards, and realized the true infection in this house wasn't Valeria's poverty, it was his mother's cruelty. "Get out," Julian said. Mercedes blinked. "Excuse me." "I said get out," Julian roared. The bellow was so powerful it rattled the window panes. The twins went instantly silent, stunned by the sound. "Out of my house, out of my life, and stay away from my children." Mercedes stood up in a huff, gripping her cane white-knuckled. "Don't you dare speak to me that way. I am your mother. I am the matriarch of the Castello dynasty. Without me, without you," Julian took a menacing step forward, trembling with rage. "Without you, I might have found happiness years ago. You turned this home into a mausoleum. You despised Elena, and now you've tried to destroy the only person who brought a spark of light into this hellhole. You are the one who doesn't belong here. You will regret this, Julian. If I walk out that door, I'm disinheriting you. I will freeze your trust funds. I will bury you at the board meeting." Julian let out a bitter, jagged laugh, glancing around the opulent room that had offered him nothing but solitude. "Keep the money," he shouted. "Keep the stocks, keep the skyscrapers, keep the damn family name. I don't give a damn. It's all worthless compared to a single smile from my sons. A smile, by the way, that you have never once put on their faces." He crouched down, planting quick kisses on Leo and Teo. "I'm going to get her back," he promised them. "Don't move. Daddy is bringing Valeria home." "Julian, if you walk out that door," Mercedes threatened. He didn't even look back. He bolted from the room, taking the stairs 2 at a time, nearly flying into the foyer. His sports car sat in the drive. He patted his pockets for the keys, realizing he was still in his dress trousers and shirt, no wallet, no phone. It didn't matter. He jumped into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, matching the ferocity of the man behind the wheel. "Roberto!" he screamed at his mother's chauffeur, who was leisurely smoking a cigarette by the limousine. "Where did you drop her?" Terrified by Julian's feral expression, the driver fumbled his cigarette. "At the bus stop on the main highway, sir." 2 kilometers out? She said she didn't have the fare to go any further. Julian didn't wait for another word. He stomped on the gas tires, screaming against the damp gravel tearing away from the mansion, his mother, and the entire life of pretense that meant nothing to him now. The bus stop was nothing more than a structure. It was just a jagged skeleton of rust and grime standing on the shoulder of the desolate back road. The place was completely deserted, save for a lone silhouette huddled on the cracked plastic bench bracing against the biting post-storm chill. Valeria sat with her battered suitcase resting against her ankles, dry-eyed because she had simply run out of tears to shed. She stared blankly at the horizon, dreading the moment she'd have to tell her ailing mother she'd lost the paycheck, haunted by the memory of Teo's face when the driver dragged her away. She felt hollowed out and cheapened, tossed aside like yesterday's trash. The rural quiet shattered as an engine roared, a sleek black sports car tearing up the asphalt at a breakneck pace. Valeria didn't bother looking up, assuming it was just another wealthy weekend warrior rushing to the country club. But the vehicle didn't fly past. Instead, tires screamed against the pavement as it drifted into a chaotic halt right in front of the shelter. The driver's door flew open with urgent force. Startled, Valeria gripped her luggage handle like a lifeline, just as Julian scrambled out of the low-slung car. His hair was a wind-blown mess, his dress shirt unbuttoned, and mud splattered his chest, heaving like he had just sprinted a marathon. The Millionaire facade was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a desperate man as he shouted her name and bolted toward the bench. She scrambled to her feet and backed away until she hit the grimy glass wall, the morning's shame crashing over her all over again. "Mr. Costello, please, I don't want any trouble," she stammered, voice trembling. "I'm leaving, I promise. The bus is almost here. I didn't take a single thing. I swear your mother can search my bag right now." Julian frozen right in front of her, close enough to intrude, but radiating urgency rather than anger. Hearing her beg for forgiveness for a crime she didn't commit shattered his heart. "No, don't!" he gasped, fighting for air. "I know you didn't steal anything. I know who you really are." Valeria went rigid. "What?" "I know who you are, Valeria." He lowered his voice, leaning in. "I saw the photograph with Elena. I know you were the ballerina. I know I'm the idiot who cut your scholarship funding, and I know you came to my home not for my money, but because you loved her." Valeria's face lost all color. A trembling hand flew up to cover her mouth. "I never meant to deceive you," she whispered. "I just wanted to protect what she left behind." "I know." Julian reached out, taking her frozen hands in his with profound gentleness. "And you did. You did so much more than that. You saved my boys, and you saved me." "But your mother said, 'My mother has no voice in my life anymore,'" he cut in firmly. "I threw her out, Valeria. She's gone. That house belongs to me and my children, and I want it to be your home too." Valeria searched his gaze for any hint of cruelty or fleeting pity, but found only raw, burning honesty. "What are you saying?" she breathed. "I'm saying I can't walk back through those doors unless you're with me." He squeezed her fingers tight. "I don't want a babysitter. I don't want some stiff French governess. I want the woman who dances at 3 a.m. to chase away the nightmares. I want the woman who sings in the bath to break a fever. I want you, Julian. I'm just the help. I have nothing. You people are... I'm just a man who was stumbling in the dark until you turned on the light." He released one hand to gently cup her cheek thumb, brushing away a smudge of dirt. "Come home, not as staff but as family. Come back so we can finally dance together. Please." Valeria glanced past him to see the bus lumbering into view down the long highway. It was her escape route, a ticket back to the safety of the struggle she knew so well. Then she turned back to Julian, a man broken down and pieced back together, looking at her like she was the only thing in the universe that mattered. She thought of the boys, Leo and Teo. She thought of Elena and the silent vow she had made to her friend. Valeria's smile broke through like dawn after a hurricane. "Your living room floor? It has excellent traction for pirouettes," she said, eyes glistening. Julian let out a laugh, pure euphoric relief, and pulled her into a crushing embrace. He swept her off her feet, spinning her around on the grimy roadside pavement, while the bus driver laid on the horn as he cruised by, assuming they were just a pair of lovesick fools, which they absolutely were. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Costello estate had lost its cold museum-like quality. Tricycles formed a blockade in the foyer, and the pristine marble walls were now plastered with crayon masterpieces held up by Scotch tape. The silence was gone, replaced by a constant happy hum. It was 8 in the evening. In the grand salon, the priceless furniture had been permanently shoved into the corners to clear a makeshift dance floor. Julian sat right on the floor, the bespoke suits long forgotten in favor of worn-out denim and a black tee. He had Teo curled up in his lap while Leo darted around them, snatching at soap bubbles drifting through the warm air. Valeria took center stage in the living room, stripping away the identity of the help, no uniform, no yellow gloves. She was clad in simple lavender chiffon that draped over her like a second skin, her movements executing a perfect, graceful professionalism. She had regained her technical prowess, yet she moved with a wild freedom the Paris Conservatory had never managed to instill in her. The music faded out on a single tender piano note. Valeria offered a theatrical bow to her audience, her husband and children. Julian set Teo down and rose to his feet, clapping. He walked over to where she stood, radiant, slightly breathless, and overflowing with happiness. "Bravo," Julian whispered, slipping his arms around her waist to pull her close. "I think the critics approved," she joked, gesturing toward the twins giggling on the carpet. The head critic was mesmerized. He replied, gazing at her with pure devotion. "You know my mother called today. She wanted to visit the children for Christmas." He felt Valeria tense up. "And what did you say?" "I told her this house is reserved for those who know how to dance in the rain," he said, "and she never liked getting her shoes wet." Valeria smiled, linking her hands behind his neck. "You're terrible, Julian Costello." "I'm happy, Valeria Costello. Thanks to you." They shared a slow, lingering kiss while the playlist in the background skipped to the next track. Gone was the classical music, replaced by a jazzy, upbeat version of that old lullaby about the boat and the star. Julian took her hand. "Care to dance, Mrs. Costello? Always Mr. Costello, even if you step on my feet." And there, in the middle of their beautifully chaotic home, the billionaire and the former nanny began to sway their twirling silhouettes, sealing the scars of yesterday with the rhythm of genuine love. The end.